So let me start with the two areas that we know respond really, really well to things like meditation and exercise. Those two brain areas are the hippocampus, critical for long-term memory, your ability to form and retain new long-term memories for facts and events. And the second brain area is your prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead, critical for your ability to shift and focus attention. It's important for your personality, for decision making. So here is a model of the human brain. So there's a front part and a back part. This front part is right behind our forehead. That's the prefrontal cortex, critical for the ability to shift and focus attention. Also, a part of the brain that is very responsive to what you bring into your life. Exercise actually really helps the prefrontal cortex. Meditation helps area 10 of the prefrontal cortex, which is right in the very front, right here. The second brain area that you will benefit from when you make your brain big and fat and fluffy is a structure called the hippocampus, which is buried deep in this lobe right here, which is the temporal lobe. The hippocampus means seahorse, and the hippocampus is critical for your ability to form and retain new long-term memories for facts and events. You have one on the right and you have one on the left. So for you, superstar podcaster, what do you need to do? You need to remember all the details of that guest that you're sitting in front of. You need to be able to focus. What did they say? What do I want to ask next? And how do I want to come back to those things? That is a combination of what your prefrontal cortex is doing for you and your hippocampus is doing for you. So I submit that when you do these things that we know from neuroscience are going to make your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus big and fat and fluffy, you will be better at doing your job as a podcaster. I am better as a dean and a professor of neuroscience, and teaching in class, for example, is where I'm using my prefrontal cortex and my hippocampus the most. Most of us would benefit from these things that make our brains big and fat and fluffy. It takes me back to the first day of my freshman year at UC Berkeley. When I walked into the classroom, I didn't know it at the time, but the classroom of the professor that discovered brain plasticity. Her name is Marion Diamond, and she was the very first female PhD in neuroanatomy that UC Berkeley ever gave. I walked into her classroom in the 80s when I went to college, but she discovered this in the late 1960s, when it was thought, as you said, that the adult brain can't change at all. There's absolutely no evidence for it. And that was true at the time. She thought, I don't think that's true. Let's do a simple experiment. Let's try and look at the effects in two randomly grouped set of rats, one that lives in what they would consider an enriched environment. What would be an enriched environment? Well, for her, it was a rat cage full of toys that got changed out all the time, lots of other rats to play with, and lots of activity. I think of it as the Disney World of rat cages. And she compared the brains of those rats to rats that she raised in kind of a shoebox, a smaller environment. They got free food and water, all the food and water they could eat and drink, but maybe only one other rat and no toys. Now, if the adult brain, they were all the same age, they were adults. If the adult brain didn't change, then there should be absolutely no difference between the brains raised in Disney World and the brains raised in the shoebox. But she found that the brains of those rats raised in the Disney World of rat cages, the outer covering of the brain, the outside of the brain here, I'm pointing to the outside of this brain model here, called the cortex. It was actually thicker. She was a neuroanatomist, and she showed that the thickness of this outer covering actually grew. What does that mean? There were more synaptic connections there, not in the whole brain, in certain brain areas. That made sense. The visual cortical area. There was much more visual stimulation in the Disney World of rat cages. The motor areas were thicker. The somatosensory, the touch areas were thicker because they were interacting in a much more complex way with their touch system. And that was the first demonstration the adult brain could change, and that it would actually make the cortex of the brain grow. And now we know, what is it about the Disney World of rat cages, Is it the toys? Should we all be playing with toys? Later studies showed that you get almost identical effects just by giving rats a running wheel. Physical activity is doing all of that, has the potential to change all of that in the rodent brain and now in the human brain. So can learning the streets of London, which are, I can't remember the number of different streets that London taxicab drivers have to learn to pass the famous test called the knowledge. But I do remember that it takes them 4 years to study for this test. It is intense knowledge. You have to learn all the lawful ways to get from all the big landmarks to be a certified London taxicab driver. And what my colleague Eleanor Maguire, a professor of neuroscience at University College London, did is she followed wannabe London taxicab drivers during their 4 years of the knowledge, this test for London taxicab drivers, knowing that half of them were going to fail. They were not going to make it. And so she tested them at the beginning and asked, how is your memory? And how big is your hippocampus? Identical for all of the wannabe London taxicab drivers before they started.
She scanned their brains?
Yeah, she scanned their brains and she tested their memory.
Okay.
Behaviorally. Then they go through, half of them drop out, they don't become London taxicab drivers, and half of them become certified London taxicab drivers after successfully learning all of this. Now let's see, how big is your hippocampus and how good is your memory? The people that passed the test and became London taxicab drivers, the posterior part of their hippocampus, which is the part we know is important for it, with posterior is back towards the back of the head. The posterior part of the hippocampus, which is kind of a cigar-shaped structure that goes from the front part of the brain to the back part of the brain, that back part of the brain was significantly bigger in those successful London taxicab drivers compared to the failed London taxicab drivers. And the memory of the successful London taxicab drivers were now superior to the memory of the wannabe London taxicab drivers that failed. So that is an example of how intense learning in a particular part of the brain, we know the posterior hippocampus is absolutely involved in spatial learning. That can change the actual structure and the function.